Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Front and Center, a program that focuses on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concerns the welfare and well-being for every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. Join me in this half-hour program here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. You can watch this program over Radyo Pilipinas World Service via Facebook page live broadcast. Just access our Facebook page, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. You can also catch every Front and Center programs over our YouTube channel. Just type in your YouTube browser, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. And the program Front and Center and the programs of Radyo Pilipinas World Service can also be listened to the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. So come and join us for another edition of Front and Center. I'm your host, Jerome Toledo. On April 10, 2024, Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. went to the United States on an official working visit to participate on a historic event, which is the trilateral meeting with United States President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Together with the Philippine delegation, President Marcos Jr. arrived in Maryland, USA on April 10th, Wednesday, US time around 7:47 in the evening. Before leaving Manila, President Marcos said his visit to the United States will build upon his previous meetings with Prime Minister Kishida and U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris in September last year in Jakarta, Indonesia. President Marcos said he also intends to explore ways of advancing cooperation, especially in the areas of critical infrastructure, semiconductors, digitalization, and cybersecurity, among others. The chief executive will also meet with business leaders in the United States to invite them to invest in the Philippines. Here is Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.'s speech before departing to attend the trilateral meeting in the United States.
Today I leave for Washington, D.C. to attend the first Philippine-U.S.-Japan Trilateral Summit. It is a historic meeting, and a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, and it is aimed at advancing trilateral cooperation between our three countries, which have long enjoyed warm and friendly relations and robust cooperation. This visit builds upon my previous meeting with Prime Minister Kishida and U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris last September in Jakarta. This was actually what they called in diplomatic circles a pull-aside, where during the farewell dinner of ASEAN, because it was the last summit that Indonesia was chairing, we had a pull-aside and we talked quite comprehensively about the idea of having this trilateral agreement. This was also the follow-up to this was held with our foreign ministers and our national security advisors last year. During this summit, I will underscore the importance of enhancing our continued economic cooperation with a view of promoting economic resilience and, of course, security. I intend to explore ways of advancing cooperation, especially in the areas of critical infrastructure, semiconductors, digitalization, and cybersecurity, critical minerals, renewable energy, as well as defense and maritime cooperation. It is my intention also to exchange views with my U.S. and Japanese counterparts on various regional security issues of mutual concern, while continuing to reiterate the importance of upholding the rule of law and preserving the rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region. On the margins of the summit, I will also have a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Biden, just kabilang dalawa. At I think he's also going to have that bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Kishida, where we will continue our discussions on strengthening further our alliance between our two countries, and also to meet with U.S. business leaders to invite them once again to invest in the Philippines. I look forward to moving the discussion to a progressive discussion so that what our intention really is to strengthen the partnerships between our three countries, between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. It is not, it is mainly an agreement to strengthen the cooperation on the economic front. Of course, security and defense is going to be part of that discussion, but nonetheless, I think I can assure everyone that that is not the main intent of this trilateral agreement. The main intent of this trilateral agreement is for us to be able to continue to flourish, to be able to help one another, and of course, to keep the South China Sea as a freedom, to keep the peace in the South China Sea and the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. To that end, this is the details of that are what we are going to be discussing very, very soon. And I hope to come back with some good results in the next few days.
The trilateral meeting between the head of states from the Philippines, US, and Japan is also expected by many analysts to tackle issues on peace and regional security in the Indo-Pacific region and the West Philippine Sea, where Chinese coast guards and its maritime militia continues to harass and intimidate Filipino fishermen, as well as preventing resupply missions by the Philippine Coast Guard to the marooned Philippine Navy ships, Sierra Madre in the Ayungin Shoal. Before the trilateral meeting, a maritime cooperation activity was held within the Philippines Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, participated by like-minded countries such as contingents from naval and air assets from Japan, Australia, and the United States, reinforcing the stand against China's claim of almost the entire West Philippine Sea and showing China that the region must always exercise freedom of navigation. And to help us understand the significance of this trilateral summit, particularly in the aspect of defense, we have on our program the renowned international studies expert, none other than Professor Rene De Castro. Prof. Rene, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this on-the-air discussion regarding this very relevant issue.
All right. It's our pleasure to Professor De Castro. First things first, how do you see this trilateral summit in your perspective as an international studies expert?
I can see basically three major implications of this trilateral summit. First and foremost, of course, is the fact that you have the creation creation of a link between two very important alliances of the United States. Mm-hmm. Number one, of course, is the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951. You have, of course, that alliance that had been had been there since the 1950s. And second, of course, is linking it with another. In fact, the most crucial, what is called the cornerstone of U.S. military presence in the region, and that is, of course, the U.S.-Japan security relations. So you have, of course, the link between these two alliances, creating what we call a minilateral. So instead of just having two allies, you have basically one treaty ally, that's the United States, and of course, then you have, of course, the Philippines and Japan as its treaty ally. And of course, at the base of this triangle, you see the closer security partnerships between the Philippines and Japan. So that's the creation of another minilateral. The other here is the fact the approach of this minilateral is a holistic approach regarding security. Of course, as mentioned in the joint statement, there is, of course, a need for the three countries to cooperate in maintaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific Declaration. A large portion of the joint declaration has to do with, number one, promoting inclusive economic growth. Then, of course, announcing the Luzon corridor, developing critical emerging infrastructures, and, of course, advancing climate partnership and clean energy and supply chain. So you have, of course, a holistic view when we talk about security. We are not simply focused on what you call the traditional geopolitical security approach. It is backed, of course, by what President Marcos called the importance of economic security. We could only enhance our national security, the Philippines, and of course also in terms of linking it with our security treaty ally and partner, without, of course, looking into the importance of economic development. So the joint declaration provides for a number of measures that is aimed, of course, to develop the Philippine economy, and of course, linking the Philippine economy up to two of the most dynamic economies in the Indo-Pacific region, the United States economy, which is, of course, the largest economy in the world, and, of course, the Japanese economy, the second largest economy in the Indo-Pacific region, and, of course, the fourth largest economy in the world. So you have, of course, seeing what I would call a holistic and comprehensive view regarding security. And the third aspect here, of course, is the fact that we're seeing a more activist role of Japan when it comes to enhancing regional security, and more so buttressing Philippine economic and, of course, economic and traditional security. So we have to look at this trilateral meetings in terms of three very important developments: creation of a minilateral that is made up, of course, of the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, then, of course, the U.S.-Japan security relations. Then second aspect, of course, in terms of looking at it in terms of what we call comprehensive security, the right combination of strategic security with what we call economic security. And the third one, of course, is we are seeing a more active and robust role of Japan when it comes to security issues in the Indo-Pacific region.
All right, it looks like does not cover the defense, but also as well as the economic and the maritime cooperation.
Economic is very important, and the emphasis, of course, maritime cooperation, which of course also under security. But at the same time, again, as mentioned by our president, our approach to security should be holistic. We cannot realize national security if we don't take into account economic security.
All right. Okay. Prof. De Castro, once again, the United States United States President Joe Biden has said that the United States' commitment in the defense of the Philippines and Japan remains ironclad, and it is evident in the actions of our allied countries as they have participated in the joint naval exercise along with like-minded countries such as United States, Japan, and Australia. Of course, China is just watching from a distance. Upon this statement from President Biden alone, will the United States step up its commitment in protecting our maritime territory?
I think so. It's also mentioned in the joint development that the United States would assist in the development of the Philippine Coast Guard. The United States would also assist in developing our capabilities for what we call maritime domain awareness. And more significantly, the United States would also assist in developing the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines. Interestingly, Japan has also made a pitch in terms of assisting the Philippine government and also enhancing our maritime domain awareness. Also, of course, this is all unprecedented. The fact that Japan has also made a commitment to assist in the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines. You have to understand, since the end of the Second World War, Japan has adopted a extremely pacifist, and of course, constrained itself from providing military or security assistance to other countries. Now, Japan, of course, has basically indicated that in fact, it has already provided non-lethal military assistance to the Philippines in form of reconnaissance aircraft and, of course, a radar facility. Now, there's a possibility that Japan would also provide what we
Mm-hmm.
we would call weapon system to
Mm-hmm.
enhance the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines.
Okay. And does that include the Japan's RAA?
Oh, that will be another story. The reciprocal access agreement, where of course we would provide legal guarantees not only to Japanese, Japanese self-defense forces coming to the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
but also it would cover personnel
Mm-hmm.
and officers of the armed forces of the Philippines who will be conducting military exercises in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also an indication that Japan is already moving out of its highly pacifist
Mm-hmm.
posture when it comes to defense issue.
All right. Okay, Professor De Castro, in some other issues, in a recent article that was released by Global Times, it said that the Philippines, as the article stated, is merely being used as a tool by the United States and Japan. And in addition, the Chinese government reacted against this trilateral, stating their opposition to the cobbling together of exclusive small circles and to confrontation between different groups in the region. Your thoughts on this, Professor De Castro?
Well, number one, let's look into the Chinese narrative regarding Philippines, of course, relying on its security partnership and in a way also challenging China's expansive claim in the South China Sea. This is usual Chinese narrative that the
Mm.
Philippines simply does not have any agency nor identity. The Philippines is only a puppet of these great powers. This is simply very insulting to the Philippine government and very insulting to the Filipino public or nation. That
Mhm.
we're engaged with China in a territorial dispute, in a maritime dispute, primarily because of the fact that China is depriving us of our exclusive economic zone in the West Philippine Sea.
Mhm.
China, of course, is driving away our fisher folks in their traditional fishing grounds. The Chinese Coast Guard is, of course, harassing ships of the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy. China is preventing us from providing, of course, supplies to our personnel on board the BRP
Mhm.
Sierra Madre. But the Chinese position has always been we don't simply a puppet of these great powers. This is simply insulting to any Filipino, and this is something that all Filipinos should reject. We have an issue with China. China, of course, is depriving us of our maritime entitlement in the South China Sea. We're doing this not because we're a puppet of any great power. We're doing it because we have, stakes when it comes to our maritime entitlement in the West Philippine Sea. We have legitimate stakes when it comes to ordinary Filipino fisher folks fishing in their traditional fishing ground. We have, of course, stake in making sure that the Philippine Navy could operate in our maritime domain and the Coast Guard can do their law enforcement activities in our exclusive economic zone.
Mhm.
So this is something that every Filipino should reject. That we don't have any agency, we don't have any personality, we don't have any legitimate dispute with China.
Mhm.
During the East Asian Summit in Jakarta, when he basically criticized any view or notion that the dispute in the South China Sea is simply a case of great power competition. They
Mhm.
have a dispute in the South China Sea because China is depriving the Philippines of its maritime entitlement in the West Philippine Sea and South China Sea. So that's an important point that we would have to raise. What's the other point you mentioned aside from this? Can you repeat it again?
Um, it's the cobbling together of exclusive small circles and to confrontation between different groups in the region.
First of all, that's not none of China's business.
Mhm.
If countries in the region would try to form this supposed alliance or security partnership, it's because they're sovereign, independent state.
Mhm.
China has no business
Mhm.
telling sovereign, independent states what they have to do
Mhm.
because they're independent. They are not tributary kingdoms of China.
Right.
So China has no business.
Mhm.
China has no business treating the Philippines like a tributary kingdom. As a sovereign independent state, the Philippines could decide
Mhm.
on who would be its security partners, whether, of course, it would enhance or in a way try to downgrade its alliance with the United States, and how, of course, it would have to deal with China in terms of the fact that
Mhm.
China is, of course, depriving the Philippines of its maritime
Right.
entitlement in the South China Sea. So
Mhm.
again, something that every Filipino should reject that China has
Mhm.
no business treating countries in the region as its tributary kingdoms.
Right. Okay. And also related to that, Professor De Castro, India expressed support for the Philippine government in upholding our rights in the West Philippine Sea, as New Delhi has border disputes too with China. And with that, are we seeing Indian naval forces to conduct military exercises along with allied countries sooner?
Uh, this is something that also we have to welcome because India is a democracy, India is a maritime power, and India is also a member of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. That's, of course, another minilateral that had been created earlier. So this minilateral is made up of the United States, Japan, Australia, and of course India. Although it's not an alliance, it's a more of a security forum that, of course, focuses on Chinese action in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is something that we should welcome. If India would, of course, join Australia, Japan, and the United States in
Mhm.
conducting maritime cooperative activities in the West Philippine Sea and, of course, the South China Sea. As the saying goes, the more, the merrier.
I see. Okay, Professor De Castro, let's go back to the trilateral summit. President Marcos Jr. said facing the complex challenges of our time requires concerted efforts on everyone's part, and it's a dedication to a common purpose and an unwavering commitment to the rules-based international order. And upon hearing this, Professor De Castro, this is like every country surrounds the disputed waters must observe rules-based international order. Do you agree on this, Professor?
Definitely, of course. All countries, whether big or small, should adhere to international law. We on the reality of international relations, so the fact that you have, of course, one superpower, great powers, middle powers, and small powers. They have, of course, disparities, discrepancies in terms of their comprehensive capabilities, military, economic, what we call soft power, cultural power. But what is an important equalizer in international relations is, of course, adherence to international law. So this, in a way, observance and adherence to international law should be seen as a mark of good citizenship in terms of being a member of the international community of nations. So that's prerequisite, especially, of course, if you are a great power. Great powers, of course, had greater responsibility to adhere and observe international law.
All right.
Unfortunately, of course, we have a great power in our neighborhood that is simply so disrespectful, so disparaging when it comes to international law, and more specifically, of course, to the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and of course, also in terms of its observance to the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling on the South China Sea. I need not mention the name of that great power, who has an extremely disparaging view when it comes to international law in general, and of course the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling in particular.
All right. Okay, in some other developments, Professor De Castro, recently, former President Rodrigo Duterte denied that there was a gentleman's agreement between him and Chinese President Xi Jinping, adding that a status quo was reached during his visit to China. How do you see this statement from the former president?
I think his allegation that there was no gentleman's agreement between him and China has been recently been disputed by no less than the Global Times. Have you read it? The Global
Yep.
Times said that
Mm-hmm.
there was, of course, a gentleman's agreement
Mm-hmm.
between President Rodrigo Duterte, former President Rodrigo Duterte, and President Xi Jinping. It came out just recently,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to do, of course, with a Yunging Shoal.
Mm-hmm.
And what is interesting, yeah, the fact is this gentleman's agreement between uh, former President Rodrigo Duterte, and Chinese President Xi Jinping, when it comes to the Yunging Shoal, might be just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
Probably it's time for the Filipino nation to ask and hold former President Duterte accountable to any other gentleman agreements he entered into with President Xi Jinping without, of course, informing the Philippine public, or at least informing, of course, the Philippine Senate. or the Philippine Congress. Because again, the president, although the president is the architect of the country's foreign policy, the president is still accountable to, of course, the Senate, to Congress, and of course to the ordinary Filipino people regarding actions that, of course, he had conducted while he's in office, especially when it comes to important issues like, of course, foreign policy and, of course, national defense issues.
All right. And it looks like former President Duterte has to answer that uh,
Yeah,
allegations
and then,
of
of course,
gentleman's agreement.
to make probably the Philippine Senate and even the Philippine Congress to ask him, to make him accountable to, of course, a Senate or a congressional hearing to possible, allegations that he actually had a number of gentlemen's agreement with China or President Xi Jinping.
Okay. All right. Okay, Professor De Castro, and also recently, presidential sister, which is Senator Amy Marcos, has been vocal during interviews that the government must take heed and not to rush in any activity that may put the Philippines in a dangerous situation with China. And according to her, the armed forces of the Philippines is not yet ready or well equipped in case a conflict arises with China. How do you see this statement from Senator Amy Marcos?
Well, as a chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, and of course, as a senator, she's entitled to express her view. But at the end of the day, when it comes to crucial decision, when it comes to Philippine foreign and security policies, there's only one person who had the final say, and that's, of course, the commander-in-chief, no less than President Bongbong Marcos.
Okay. One last question for today, Professor De Castro. Can this influence the administration's efforts in the diplomatic arena, especially with the international community, that given that statement of Senator Amy Marcos?
No. At the end of the day, it's the president who has, of course, the final say. And of course, she might voice her opinion, but she's only a senator. She's dealing, of course, the decision has been made by the executive, the president of the Republic of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Her opinion at the end of the day doesn't simply matter because, again, we go back to our constitution. The president is the architect of Philippine foreign policy.
Right.
The president is the country's top diplomat. The
Right.
president is, of course, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Philippines.
Okay.
So the buck stops with the president of the Philippines, not with a mere senator.
All right. Okay, with that, and thank you so much, Professor Rene De Castro, for giving us your valuable insights regarding this trilateral summit. And we'll hope we have you in the program the next time.
Thank you very much.
Eh,
Okay.
All right, thank you. And that wraps up another edition of Front and Center. I hope you enjoyed today's edition of Front and Center here in Radyo Pilipinas World Service. You can watch this program over Radyo Pilipinas World Service via Facebook page live broadcast. Just access our Facebook page, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. You can also catch every Front and Center programs over our YouTube channel. Just type in your YouTube browser, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. And also the program Front and Center and the programs of Radyo Pilipinas World Service can also be listened to the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. Together with our producer Erwin Peñano and technical personnels Leo Magpayo and Milo Junella, this is your host Jerome Toledo. Join us again in another episode of Front and Center. Mabuhay and love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.